Okay, good morning. This is our first class that we're doing online. Obviously, this is not the way that we normally do things, but the old normal is not the new normal, so let's do what we can. I want to go back to last week's parasha in order to make a point that appears in this week's parasha that relates to the whole situation that we're in. This idea is coming from someone who's writing in Israel today named Rabbi Amnon Bazak. One of the top Tanakh scholars that are around. He looks at last week's parasha, which not only is last week's parasha, but it's also timely because we're in that time of year, which starts with the idea of the shekalim, the Mahatzit haShekel. At the beginning of parashat Ki Tisa reads as follows: "V'daber Hashem Moshe lamor, Ki Tisa et rosh Bnei Yisrael ifkudehem." When you will take a census, when you're going to count Bnei Yisrael, each one individually. And each person should give a funny word. A kofer means like a ransom or something of a protective term to Hashem when they're being counted. And there won't be a plague when you're doing the census. And of course, what is the amount? The next pasuk tells us you give a Mahatzit haShekel, a half shekel, and there's no difference between who you are, what your financial status is. The pasuk actually says the wealthy person doesn't give much, and the poor person doesn't give less. Everyone has to give Mahatzit haShekel, and there's this emphasis of protecting their lives from a plague by giving this Mahatzit haShekel. And obvious question is, so why? What's the point? What's happening here when we're giving the Mahatzit haShekel? Why would there be a plague? And if there would be a plague, how would giving half a shekel have anything to do with protection against that plague? Okay, so that's the question that we're dealing with. Why is there a plague? Why would we be concerned about a plague at the time of a census? And why would giving a half a shekel somehow resolve that issue? So to answer that, Rashi has a very interesting point. Rashi says the following thing. He says, "Yitnu kol echad mahatzit haShekel, v'timnet haShekalim v'teda minyanam." So Rashi says that what do? Because everyone gives half a shekel, instead of counting the people, you're counting the shekalim, and by this means you're resolving the issue, right? Because you're counting the shekalim and not counting the people, so there's no problem. So what do we understand by that? It seems like that because I would count the person, him or herself, then that would be creating a problem. But if I were to count the money, so then that's not a problem. That's how Rashi puts it, and it's very famous and very well understood, very well known piece. But there's some difficulties with it. Number one. The one question is, what's wrong with counting the person, right? Why does that create a problem? And number two question is, even though the pasuk says that everyone should give half a shekel, it actually never says count the shekalim and not the people. That's something that Rashi has to say in order to explain what's going on, but that's not necessarily the plain sense of the text. So again, to review what we've said is, we see that the Torah tells us count when we're doing a census, right? And it's interesting, it's when we're doing a census, what do you have to do? You have to give half a shekel because there's a concern that the people there's going to be some kind of plague if you do the census. It doesn't say why or how or what have you. And Rashi seems to be answering that the reason that it's so is if you were to count the people, that would be a problem. But if you count the coins, which represent the people, that's not a problem. That's Rashi's.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Rabbi, what's the background in terms of not counting people? Is there anything in Tanakh that says don't count people? Because we know it's a famous thing, don't count people.
Right. So this is really where it comes from, and that's kind of what we're trying to get to. There are other situations in the Tanakh where there is a census done and it leads to a plague. So there is definitely a connection between taking a census and having a plague. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that. By the way, I'm muting whoever's on the phone, or I'm just going to mute you for a second if you.
Sorry, because we're on tape. Sorry. Yep. Go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. It's okay. It's not bad. So the point is, there is a concern for whatever reason. We're not sure that when there's a census, it could create a plague, because it's expressed here that it's a possibility in the parasha that we read this past week, and we see elsewhere in the Navi that there is a plague at times when they take some version of a census. So that's really what we're getting at here. And obviously, I don't want to make too much of this, right? But happens to be 2020 is a census year in the United States of America, and
Right.
we happen to be dealing with, some version of a plague. Joe, I don't know why the sun shines brighter in your house than in mine. No, it's good. I'm just saying, and you have a beautiful sunshine. I get to have houses across the street. Good for you. And it's not a problem. Don't worry. So let's see some other points. So first of all, what's the concern about counting and there being a plague? So Rashi says that the Shahaminyan sholet bo ayin hara. He says when you count, there's some ayin hara. Now, what does that mean? Once we start talking ayin hara, already we're talking intangible, maybe non-understandable, and again, that's not so irrelevant today as well. He says, but that's not enough. So the Malbim, a much later commentary, but a very important one, says a very interesting piece that I'd like to read. He says, "Ki kol od ha'am mit'achadim behem kulam ki ish echad zechut harabim gadol ma'od." He says, listen, as long as the whole nation is one, they're united, they're all one person, so they have a tremendous merit that comes from being a whole unit. Aval keshemonim otam, but once you start counting them, sha'az mafridim kol ish b'fnei atzmo, v'yachupshu ma'asehem, v'az yishlot b'hem neged. He says, but once you start separating them, which happens when you count them each individually, he says, once you start separating them, then everyone stands on their own. So basically what he's saying is like this. He says, listen, when we look at the community, the United States of America, the nation of Israel. So what we have is, we have the idea that we're protected by this one giant entity that we're all a part of. It says, but once you start counting individually, now you stand alone. And when you stand alone, now it's not so simple, right? Who really is able to stand alone? Says the Rabbi Bazak, a beautiful idea. He says, and this is why the idea of saying the wealthy can't be more and the poor can't give less, because what are we trying to do? The giving of the coins isn't so much about trying to have an alternate way of counting them, but rather of connecting them all together, connecting all the people together. By connecting them together, them all being united and the same and being a part of something together, it turns the census from being about individuality to remaining about the collective whole, right? And that's an interesting point and a good point, and perhaps why where the plague comes from, right? Where does a plague come from? When we each think that we stand on our own, so then the danger falls on every one of us. Plague we tend to think of as something that wipes out everyone, but what it's saying is the plague is a result of everybody standing on their own. What's interesting is that this actually relates to the coming week parasha as well. This week we're going to read HaShekel and Pikudei. It's a double parasha, it's long, and God willing we get to read it in shul. Hopefully we can figure out some way by Shabbat to get us all back together. I'm just going to read a little bit from what it says. Right towards the beginning of Parashat Pikudei, which is the second of the two parashiot that it says, it seems like there's another contribution of silver pieces, because there's contribution of lots of other things going on in the Mishkan, but then it says there's all the silver pieces. It says the kesef Pikudei ha'edah me'at kikar ve'elef u'shva ma'ot v'chamisha b'shivim shekel b'shekel hakodesh. This is if anyone wants to look this up later, this is right at the beginning of Parashat Pikudei. It's chapter 38, starting from Pasuk 25. In English, it says, the silver that the community gives was 100 talents, 1,775 shekels in this holy shekel. Beka lagulgolet, mahatzit haShekel b'shekel hakodesh, a beka for every head. Interesting the way that they say it. Basically, everyone gave a beka, mahatzit haShekel b'shekel hakodesh, l'kol ha'oved al pikudim ben 20 shana v'mala, ל-600,000 ו-3,550. It seems like during the Mishkan, when they were collecting for the Mishkan, they did another mahatzit haShekel from everyone. So what's interesting is, what did this silver get used for? And that's what the next two Pesukim talk about. It says,
so there's two different Mahatzit haShekel events?
Yes, maybe even more than two, but at least two almost back to back. But here, right, there was the Mahatzit haShekel for the census. Now, the Torah seems to be telling us there was also, when they were giving to the Mishkan, that was a different concept. That was not so much a census. That was everyone give what you can to the Mishkan. So they gave gold and silver and leather and other things. So silver was one of the things that they gave. And it's interesting, the way that was given was similar to the census, which was that they gave the half shekel, right? What's interesting is, what was the half shekel used for? So it says, "Vahim at kikar hakesef atzeket et adnei hakodesh ve'et adnei haparochet ma'at adanim ma'at hakikar la'aden." They use this for the adanim, and then the next pasuk says, "and for the vavim." So the adanim and the vavim are the sockets and the hooks that would be used to connect the beams to have the Mishkan stand. So the silver was used exclusively for connection pieces. And it's very interesting, right? Because what would you think, if you think about the Mishkan, what do we tend to think about? We think about the Aron, this beautiful, container that held held the luchot and so on. It's a beautiful box, all made out of gold. Or maybe the altar, the mizbeach, which was made out of copper. So it's interesting for those things. Great, there were these individual things. The menorah also made out of gold, the table, so on. The silver was not used for that. The silver, which was given half piece by everyone, that was used, even in the way that was used, wasn't used for a particular utensil, but rather for items which themselves were kind of hook and eye, that were this connection piece. So there was this constant message of having this need to bond together and to connect to one another, and that when we stand alone, it's extremely dangerous and creates a problem. So
but also
I was
it's
thinking,
done through silver.
Yes,
but it's only done through silver.
Yes, the silver is what was used to represent that. Why the silver as opposed to the gold or the copper, I'm not really sure.
Maybe it was strongest.
I didn't think about that, but what I would say, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure why that would be so. Would have to think about that. But I think the piece that is valid and is valuable is the idea that the need to stand together. So I think that's an important message for us now during what we have. I think we need to stand together, ironically, in not getting together. I think that's an important thing. And of course, we're sitting home because we can't be gathering even in the moderate to small size gatherings that we thought we might be able to do. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and find ways to connect, because that was something that was done in the census at the time and in the building of the Mishkan, that they found ways to connect. So maybe these online meetings and things like that will be ways that we'll be able to connect. Hopefully it won't be long before we'll be able to connect in the normal ways of being able to get back together in our synagogues, in our schools, in our community centers, and so on. And God willing, we're able to address this crazy time and get through it and somehow come out stronger and better.
Amen. Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay, have a great day, everyone. We're going to try and set up other things as we go along.
Perfect.
Okay. Have a great day. Stay healthy, everybody.
You too. Thanks.
Yeah.